At exactly 12:21 p.m. on June 25, 2009, the door to bedroom 12 swung open. What the paramedics stepped into did not look like the greatest entertainer of his generation. It looked like a body that had finally surrendered. The king of pop, the kid from Gary, Indiana, who moonwalked his way into history, now lay motionless. His weight dropped to barely 112 pounds. His stomach was empty. His arms were traced with both fresh and faded injection marks. And the famous hair the world thought it knew was revealed to be something else entirely, a wig secured to scarred skin, the result of years of surgery and that Pepsi fire the public never forgot. According to official reports, only a few hours later, the autopsy file slid onto the coroner's desk. What it contained was darker than any tabloid headline. Not a scandal manufactured for ratings, not gossip traded in late-night talk shows. It was a truth so unsettling that many people instinctively rejected it. And now, after nearly 15 years of avoidance, the question circles back like a cold case reopened. What really happened in Michael Jackson's final 24 hours? The autopsy suite was cold, metallic, and hushed nothing like the roaring stadiums Michael once commanded. When the sheet was pulled back, even experienced investigators paused. This was not the body of a global icon. This was the body of a man who had been running from pain for far too long. The first shock came from the numbers. Roughly 51 kilograms. For someone around 6 feet tall, it meant a frame stripped of muscle, stripped of flesh, stripped of everything except the outline of a life burned from both ends. His ribs were clearly visible. His hips jutted out sharply, as if the body had been starving not because of vanity, but from sheer exhaustion. When the coroner opened the stomach, he expected at least some trace of a final meal, something from the previous night. Instead, he found almost nothing at all. No vegetables, no bread, no trace of real food. Only a single dissolving pill and remnants of liquid medication. The man who had once moonwalked across stages worldwide had entered his last day with a stomach that was essentially empty. Then attention turned to the arms. Both forearms showed clusters of needle marks. Some were new, some old. Some pierced so many times that the skin itself had become scarred. This did not look like casual drug abuse. These were medical-grade injection sites, consistent with weeks, maybe months, of attempts to chemically force rest. The pattern formed a narrative the world had not wanted to confront. Michael Jackson was not chasing a high. He was chasing something far more basic: sleep, a simple human function his body no longer seemed able to achieve naturally. But perhaps the most heartbreaking detail was found at the scalp. When examiners studied his head, they saw what people had quietly whispered about since the 1984 Pepsi commercial blaze. The burns, according to those records, had never completely healed. The skin was tight, scarred, uneven. Where hair should have grown freely, technicians instead found a carefully placed wig, bonded directly to damaged tissue with medical adhesive. Under the harsh lights of the autopsy room, the illusion disintegrated. Decades of physical pain, once hidden beneath hats, wigs, and flowing stage hair, stood exposed. Moving down his torso, they uncovered another painful revelation: multiple fractured ribs. But these fractures did not come from some unknown assault before he died. They were the result of desperate resuscitation efforts. Paramedics pressing down hard on a chest that was already too thin, too fragile, too weakened to withstand the force. One investigator later remarked in private, "This wasn't a superstar's body. This was the body of a man pushed past the threshold of survival." That, according to the autopsy, is the clearest truth of all. Michael Jackson did not die in a single, dramatic instant. He had been dying slowly, silently, long before June 25th. His body had become a battlefield, and those final 24 hours were not the beginning of the end, only the last, devastating blow. If the autopsy revealed what happened to Michael Jackson's body, then the 60 days leading up to his death revealed why it happened. Every account from the "This Is It" rehearsal period pointed in the same terrifying direction. Michael was not sleeping. Not a little. Not badly. According to multiple dancers and crew members, he simply was not sleeping at all. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, would later state under oath that Michael had gone for weeks without a single minute of natural sleep. His body could lie down, his eyes could close, but his brain refused to drift into real unconsciousness. It was as if insomnia had become a prison with no door. Inside the Staples Center during rehearsals, witnesses described a disturbing split in his existence. Backstage, he appeared fragile, his hands trembling, his voice thin and strained. Sometimes he needed assistance just to make it down a short hallway. His eyes often looked distant and glassy, as if his mind were trying to fight off gravity and losing. But once he stepped into the light of the stage, another version of him fought its way to the surface. The spotlight hit, the music rose, and suddenly the shaking eased. His voice found strength, his movements snapped into sharp focus. For a brief window each night, he became Michael Jackson again, a title as heavy as it was admired. Yet as soon as rehearsals wrapped, the transformation shattered. Crew members recalled him sinking into a chair, breathing heavily, sweat soaking through his clothes, whispering that he needed sleep or he would never survive opening night. That was no longer a complaint. It was a warning. Then came the sentence that still sends a chill through those who heard it. "They're going to kill me. I feel it." According to friends, dancers, and even family members, Michael said those words more than once. Some believed he was referring to the music industry. Some thought he meant the relentless pressure surrounding him. Others feared he was thinking of a specific person. But the truth is, no one ever fully understood who he believed was coming for him. Around this time, rumors began circulating among members of his security team. According to those accounts, an unidentified visitor arrived unexpectedly on the night of June 24th, just hours before Michael's death. The person was escorted upstairs and reportedly remained there for less than half an hour. Their name was never made public. That visit never appeared in the official, final timeline. To this day, fans still argue online about who that visitor might have been and why they came so late. Behind the curtain, the medical situation was spiraling out of control. Michael had been pleading for stronger sleep medications, and when conventional pills stopped working, he allegedly begged for propofol, a powerful anesthetic normally reserved for surgery in hospital settings. Imagine the depth of exhaustion required for a person to ask to be put under anesthetic just to rest for a few hours. That level of fatigue is not typical, it is catastrophic. Phone records, later examined by investigators, revealed another layer of his desperation. In a message reportedly sent to a trusted confidant just days before he died, Michael wrote that his mind would not shut off and that he was afraid to close his eyes. Put that beside the grueling rehearsal schedule, the mounting pressure of a 50-show residency, and the fact that his body was already operating on fumes, and a darker picture appears. Michael Jackson was not living through the last 60 days of his life. He was enduring them. Each night he walked onto the rehearsal stage. He resembled a ghost wearing his own legacy. Each morning he woke up, he seemed one day closer to collapse. And he knew it. He voiced it. He predicted it. The tragedy is simple and brutal at the same time. The world just was not ready to listen. The night before Michael Jackson left this world, he delivered what many witnesses still describe as the most electrifying rehearsal of his final decade. Staples Center, Los Angeles, June 24, 2009. A vast, echoing arena occupied not by screaming fans, but by dancers, lighting crews, and technicians who had spent weeks watching him struggle against fatigue. Yet on this particular night, something shifted. Around 8:30 p.m., he stepped onto the stage with a steadiness no one had seen in weeks. The house lights dimmed, the orchestra swelled, and Michael launched into the full choreography for "They Don't Care About Us," with movements so precise they felt almost surgically sharp. To the few people scattered in the seats and around the stage, it felt less like a rehearsal and more like a resurrection, as if the frail man trembling backstage had been replaced, for a moment, by the legend everyone remembered. Footage from that night would later be used in the "This Is It" documentary, locking that performance into history. But those who were there insist that the cameras missed crucial details. They noticed how he gripped the railing while climbing even a short set of stairs, how he paused longer than usual before taking his mark, how his hand went to his ribs after certain routines. Yet each time the music hit, the transformation returned. He rehearsed until around 11:45 p.m., pushing through dense choreography and demanding vocal runs that would have drained performers half his age. The dancers cheered. Kenny Ortega, the tour director, said Michael had rediscovered a spark that had been dim for weeks. Even members of the security team, accustomed to escorting a drained, unsteady figure to his vehicle, felt for the first time in a while a flicker of hope. As Michael walked off the stage for the last time, he turned to one of the dancers, lifted the corners of his mouth into a faint but genuine smile, a rare, gentle expression, and spoke what would become his final public words: "We must be perfect tomorrow." His voice was soft but firm, laced with determination and a hint of pleading, as if he were talking to himself as much as to anyone else. From there, he moved toward his waiting car. According to witnesses, the moment he stepped off the stable wooden stage and onto the hard concrete walkway, the illusion began to drain away. His posture changed. His shoulders sagged. One security guard later described it as watching a balloon slowly deflate. By the time he reached his home around 12:15 a.m., he was clearly exhausted. He did not sit down to dinner. He did not immediately change out of his clothes. To the staff member who greeted him, he said only one thing: "I have to sleep. I have to be ready." Those words would echo through the entire investigation. They were not just about pressure, not just about a demanding schedule. They were a confession of desperation. Michael understood that his body could not survive another day without rest. And after weeks of near absolute insomnia, the night of June 24th became the tipping point, the moment when simple exhaustion turned into something much more dangerous. What happened between 1:30 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not guesswork. It exists in sworn testimonies, in medical logs, and in statements given under oath. At 1:30 a.m., Michael told Dr. Conrad Murray that he still could not sleep. The adrenaline from rehearsal had driven him high, but once that rush burned off, his insomnia came crashing back with double the intensity. Murray later claimed he tried everything. He considered less invasive, first relaxation techniques, controlled breathing, conversation, even what he described as warm milk. But Michael paced the room, restless and visibly frightened, murmuring, "If I don't sleep, I won't make it through tomorrow." Around 2 a.m., Murray administered lorazepam, a sedative commonly prescribed to quiet the mind. Under normal circumstances, the dose should have led most patients into deep rest. But Michael stayed awake, eyes open, breathing fast, fingers moving anxiously across the sheets. By approximately 3-4 a.m., as his distress intensified, Murray gave midazolam, another sedative. Once again, no real sleep came. Later, medical experts would testify that the volume of medication he received between roughly 1:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. was enough to sedate a healthy adult into unconsciousness. But Michael's body did not behave like a typical patient's. It had been battered by prolonged stress, extreme insomnia, and layers of medications used in repeated attempts to force rest. At that point, normal responses no longer applied. Multiple reports say that during these hours, Michael began repeating a chilling phrase: "If I don't sleep, I'll die." He did not say it theatrically. He did not shout it for effect. According to accounts, he said it with a calm, unnerving clarity, as if he had already accepted the possibility. And perhaps, in a way, he was right, because by 4 a.m., exhaustion had blurred into raw panic. He sat upright in bed, shaking, describing a feeling of being both awake and disconnected, trapped in a mental fog that only appears when a person has been awake far longer than the body was designed to tolerate. Murray claimed that during these early morning hours, Michael began begging once again for propofol, the same surgical anesthetic he had reportedly used on previous nights to achieve a few hours of deep, artificial rest. Nurses and medical specialists would later insist this was a glaring red flag. Propofol is not a sleep aid. It is a hospital-grade anesthetic intended for operating rooms, overseen by anesthesiologists with full monitoring equipment. But in that moment, Michael was not weighing long-term risk. He was focused on one thing: surviving the next day's rehearsal. There was pressure from every angle. 50 sold-out shows, Massive financial stakes, cameras rolling, a global comeback narrative closing in. At 5 a.m., after hours of failed attempts to induce sleep, Michael reportedly spoke the words Murray would later repeat in court. "Just make me sleep. I need to sleep." By then, the sun over Los Angeles was beginning to rise. The night was almost over, and what started as another battle with insomnia had turned into something else entirely. It had turned into surrender. There is a gap in the official story between 5:30 a.m. and 10:40 a.m., a stretch of time. Investigators later began calling the missing hours. What has been described is that Michael never entered deep, restorative sleep. He drifted in and out, but his mind, by all available accounts, never fully shut down. By mid-morning, he was still not truly resting. Just after 10:30 a.m., Dr. Conrad Murray made a decision that would ignite years of controversy. According to his testimony, he prepared a small amount of propofol, insisting later that he believed it would give Michael roughly 15 minutes of rest. He described it as a light dose, a temporary bridge toward natural sleep. But anesthesiologists around the world would go on to testify that even a modest amount of propofol requires full monitoring oxygen support, proper machinery, and a controlled environment. Michael's bedroom had none of that. At approximately 10:40 a.m., Murray administered the dose. The room was quiet, the curtains were drawn. An IV line hung from a makeshift stand. A simple pulse monitor sat nearby, reportedly not secured the way it should have been. There was no oxygen tank, no crash cart, no backup team. Just a doctor, a patient, and a drug designed for operating rooms. Within moments, Michael's breathing slowed. His muscles relaxed. For the first time in days, perhaps even weeks, he appeared peaceful. Around 10:50 a.m., Murray later claimed he noticed that Michael had become too quiet. He called his name. There was no answer. He checked for a pulse. There was none. What investigators discovered afterward raised even more questions. According to phone logs and witness statements, emergency services were not contacted immediately. There was a delay long enough for doubts to form, long enough for speculation to spread, long enough for the world to wonder why. Some reports suggested Murray tried to revive him alone. Others claimed he moved around the room, calling for help. Some observers believed he was simply in shock, unable to process that his patient had slipped beyond reach. What remained undisputed, however, was stark. When paramedics finally entered the room, they found a space that looked less like a proper medical setup and more like an improvised recovery area. An IV bag hung from a closet pole. Medical supplies were scattered. The patient on the bed had not been breathing for an unknown length of time. At 11:26 a.m., Michael Jackson was transported to UCLA Medical Center. Despite the efforts that followed, the outcome was already shaping into something irreversible. Later that day, the autopsy report would begin to document, line by line, the physical state of the man the world believed it knew: a body drained, a mind overwhelmed, a legend carrying a weight his frame could no longer support. And standing behind all of it was a question that still divides experts and fans. Was Michael Jackson's final day the result of a catastrophic medical decision or the inevitable collapse of a man pushed beyond human limits? Investigators then turned their focus to a critical window of time, the roughly 30-minute span between the moment Michael stopped responding and the moment anyone finally dialed for help. In his earliest statements, Murray suggested he noticed Michael slipping into distress around 11:40 a.m. But phone records painted a different picture. Those records indicated he made several calls during that period, not to emergency services, but to personal contacts. One call lasted about 1 minute, another around 3. A third connection occurred shortly before noon. None of them were to 911. These calls became the first major fracture in Murray's timeline and led detectives to explore a darker possibility than simple negligence, that instead of seeking help immediately, someone in that room might have been trying to manage the situation quietly. Security personnel later testified that when they entered the bedroom, Murray was not on the line with paramedics. He was moving around the bedside area, unplugging equipment, gathering items. One guard described it as organizing. Another called it clearing space. Investigators used a different phrase in their notes: possible cleanup. Nothing illegal was definitively proven from that description alone, but the gap between Murray's story and what others said they witnessed unleashed a wave of questions that has never fully gone away. Then came a rumor that exploded across fan forums and documentaries, a report of an unidentified visitor seen near the hallway not long before the 911 call. According to some accounts, this guest had been escorted into the house the previous night and was allegedly seen again shortly after noon on the 25th. No official document ever confirmed who this person was or what they were doing there. Their name never appeared in the final public files. Still, the very idea that someone may have entered or exited the property during that crucial window turned into one of the most persistent theories about Michael's final hours. EMT logs later showed that when paramedics walked into bedroom 12, the scene did not resemble an active, ongoing emergency. The lighting was dim. Some equipment looked partially disconnected. The IV line was still attached but reportedly not running properly. The propofol bottle, the drug at the center of the case, was not immediately obvious. As one detective later summarized, the room did not perfectly match the story being told. What exactly had happened in that half hour? Why hadn't Murray called for help the moment he saw distress? And what, if anything, had been removed or rearranged before first responders arrived? Those questions formed a void, a 30-minute blank space that many fans now refer to as the half hour of darkness. At 12:21 p.m., the call that would shake the world was finally placed. It did not come from Murray. It did not come from a nurse or a medical professional. It came from a security guard who had run upstairs after being summoned. On the recorded 911 call, his voice trembles. His breathing is shaky. "He's not breathing," he tells the dispatcher. He tries to maintain composure, but the fear in that room leaks into every sentence. When the dispatcher asks whether CPR is underway, the guard says yes. But later, paramedics would note that the technique being used on the bed was ineffective and should have been started much earlier. Then came a line that still disturbs medical experts who have listened to the tape. "We have a doctor here, but he's just asking us to get help." To emergency specialists, that detail was deeply unsettling. Why wasn't the doctor controlling the scene? Why wasn't he the one speaking directly to the dispatcher? Why did someone else have to describe what was happening in the room? When paramedics rushed in, they expected chaos, urgent commands, frantic attempts to reverse a crisis. Instead, they entered a scene that felt strangely subdued. Michael lay motionless on the floor, his body cool to the touch. No visible response, no reaction in his pupils. To trained professionals, it looked like significant time had already passed. They worked on him anyway, they always do, but privately, one EMT later admitted it did not feel like a fresh emergency. As they carried him down the stairs, the house remained eerily quiet, punctuated only by the firm, echoing instructions of paramedics trying to fight an outcome that felt already written. By the time he reached the ambulance, many of those present understood what the final result was likely to be. Fans would go on to replay and analyze the 911 call for years, dissecting every pause, every voice, every fragment of sound in the background. They pointed to the caller's measured tone, the apparent lack of urgency from the doctor, the stretches of silence that hung over the conversation. Investigators did not publicly reveal everything they concluded, but one retired detective later summarized his view in a single sentence: "Help was called, just not soon enough." And that, to many who have studied the case, is the most haunting element of the 911 call. Not the panic you hear on the tape, but the long, unrecorded minutes of silence before it. When word broke on the afternoon of June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson is gone, the world reacted the way it had when Elvis, Lennon, and Mercury disappeared. Shock, denial, a frantic need to label the unthinkable. Within minutes, television anchors were already repeating the same phrase: possible overdose. Commentators speculated about pills, about the doctor in the house, about the comeback tour and its crushing demands. They debated the cause. They dissected the dosage. They analyzed the timing. But almost no one, not a single major headline, focused on the condition of the man who had died in that bed. Because the true shock did not come from the final trigger, it came from the state he was in before it happened. When the autopsy report was eventually made public, it did not read like a scandalous mystery script. There was no dramatic twist, no sensational conspiracy laid out in black and white. It was colder than that, clinical, detached, devastating. It presented a picture of a man whose body had been driven beyond its biological limits. Michael Jackson, the child who stunned Motown at age 11, the performer who entertained presidents and royalty, was found to weigh barely 112 pounds. His stomach was essentially empty, containing only medication. His hairline was fused to old burn scars from the 1984 accident. His body showed signs of depletion, exhaustion, chronic inflammation, long-term sleep disruption. The public had imagined a superstar collapsing, like in a movie, one dramatic moment, one tragic fall. But the reality revealed in those pages was quieter, harsher, and far more human. Michael Jackson died as someone who had simply run out of anything left to give. The coroner's description made that brutal truth inescapable. His heart had been strong for years, yet stress had hollowed him out from the inside. His muscles had wasted away. His immune system had weakened. His sleep cycle, according to experts, was almost destroyed. His mind had been operating on fumes. This was not the body of a man gearing up for 50 explosive concerts. This was the body of a man who had been silently fading while the world obsessed over choreography, ticket sales, and the idea of a triumphant comeback. For decades, Michael had poured his life into the stage. The autopsy showed that the stage and everything orbiting it gave very little back. Then came the single line in the report that changed the meaning of his death for many who read it. Signs consistent with severe and prolonged physical stress. Not a dramatic scandal. Not a single night of reckless choices. Not one bad prescription in isolation. Instead, a lifetime of pressure that no human being could withstand forever. Fans wept because a legend had vanished in one afternoon. Doctors felt something different. Grief over a human being who, in their view, had been dying slowly for a long time. In the weeks that followed, medical experts tried to explain something the public had never wanted to fully confront. Sleep is not optional. Sleep is not a luxury reserved for lazy days. The level of insomnia Michael endured, the kind that allegedly drove him to seek a surgical anesthetic just to shut his eyes, was the kind of condition that dismantles a person system by system. It alters mood. It destroys physical balance. It warps memory. It stresses the heart. It breaks a person from the inside out. Michael was not merely tired. According to those who reviewed his case, he was deteriorating. Behind the music, behind the iconic performances, behind the rehearsals where every note and every step had to be perfect, there was a man trying to hold himself together while the world demanded the version of him frozen in time from 1983. The autopsy did not read like the closing chapter of a celebrity scandal. It read like the final report from a war zone, documenting the body of a soldier who never stopped fighting. And that leads to the most chilling conclusion, spoken quietly by one of the coroners. Michael Jackson did not die on stage. He died in isolation, not surrounded by dancers, not under the roar of a crowd, but in a private bedroom with no applause, no spotlight, no music, while the life of a man who had carried an impossible crown for far too long slowly slipped away. So, could Michael Jackson have lived? Could this ending have unfolded any differently? To explore that, the story rewinds back through the final 60 days. The last rehearsals, the warnings brushed aside, the cracks in his voice, the tremors in his hands, the schedule that would have strained even the healthiest performer. Many doctors have said that, in theory, the answer is yes. If Michael had been able to sleep naturally, real sleep, not chemically forced unconsciousness, his brain, heart, and nervous system might have had enough resilience to withstand the pressure crushing him. If he had slept the way an ordinary person sleeps 6 hours, 5, even 4, his body might have stood a fighting chance. But he hadn't truly slept in weeks. Some accounts suggest it had been far longer. One investigator described it as a sleep drought no human body could survive. Others point to the schedule itself as a silent verdict. 8-hour rehearsals, full-out choreography runs, daily meetings, costume fittings, production briefings, a routine designed for an unbreakable machine, not a 50-year-old man already suffering from insomnia. The harsh conclusion from that camp is simple. The workload alone could have pushed even a healthy 5-year-old to the edge. For someone in Michael's condition, it was catastrophic. Then comes the third branch of the debate, the one that still fuels arguments every June 25th. What if Michael had been treated inside a proper medical facility instead of a private bedroom? Propofol, the anesthetic at the center of his case, is not a sleep aid. It is a surgical drug meant for operating rooms, with monitors, oxygen systems, and a team ready to respond if something goes wrong. Fans and experts alike have argued that no matter how well-intentioned, giving that drug in a home environment built risk into the situation from the start. Some call what happened a medical tragedy. Others call it avoidable. Still, others describe it as the ultimate price of fame. And then there are the millions of fans who believe something more brutal, yet more straightforward. They say he was worked to death not by a single villain in the shadows, not by one grand conspiracy, but by a system that became dependent on his genius. A system that treated Michael not as a fragile human being, but as an endless resource, a voice that would never fail, feet that would never slow, an icon whose body was expected to live up to his myth. His comeback wasn't just a tour, it was an avalanche of expectations. Wanting redemption, desperate to reclaim his reputation and prove himself one more time, Michael ran straight into it. And at the end of every documentary, every investigation, every tribute from those who still light candles on June 25th, the question remains the same. If Michael had slept, if he had rested, if someone had shielded him instead of pushing him, would the King of Pop still be alive today? There is no single answer. But there is one undeniable truth that rises from the evidence. Michael Jackson did not die because of one decision, one injection, one bad night. He died because of years of pressure, exhaustion, and isolation that stacked on top of each other until the breaking point arrived and no one recognized it in time. And maybe the real tragedy is not just that Michael Jackson is gone. The deeper tragedy is that the world did not see he was fading long before June 25th. When news of his death first hit, people reached for the simplest narrative overdose, doctor error, dangerous medication. But the autopsy and the testimony told a quieter, more devastating story. The King of Pop did not just collapse, he eroded, he deteriorated. His body weighed barely 112 pounds. His stomach was empty except for medication. His arms carried a history of injections, some old, some new. His scalp showed the lasting damage of an accident decades in the past, hidden beneath a wig fused to scar tissue. His muscles were thin. His defenses were worn down. His organs showed the strain of relentless stress. This was not the body of a man poised to dominate 50 high-energy shows. It was the body of someone who had been pushed past the line where the human body can safely function. Doctors described what they saw as consistent with prolonged physical stress. Paramedics described a scene that felt like a man whose body had been fighting for far too long. For the first time, the public glimpsed what those closest to him had quietly feared. Michael Jackson was not living like a superstar at the end. He was living like a man trying to survive the cost of being one. The shock was not just how he died. It was the realization of how much had already disappeared from him before that day. The world thought it lost a king in a single afternoon. The evidence suggests they had been losing him piece by piece for years. And then came the line that reshaped the way many people view his final chapter. Michael Jackson did not die on stage. He died in isolation. A man adored by millions left this world alone. Not under hot lights, not surrounded by music, but in a quiet room, far from the roar of the crowds he spent his life performing for. 15 years later, the same unresolved question still splits opinion. Could Michael have lived? Some medical voices still say yes, if he had been able to sleep normally, if the rehearsals had been scaled back, if the drugs had stayed inside hospital walls. Others insist the schedule itself was impossible. 8-hour days of dancing, full run-throughs, meetings, costumes, travel, press a calendar suited to a machine, not a human being. especially not a 50-year-old who hadn't been sleeping. Then there is the fiercest argument of all. He should never have been treated with propofol anywhere but a hospital. That drug belongs in an operating room, overseen by a team, backed by emergency equipment. Administering it in a bedroom didn't just add risk, it created a situation where a single misjudgment could become fatal. And so the debate fractures into two primary camps. Some call what happened a medical accident. Others call it the slow destruction of a man by exhaustion. But beneath the disagreement lies one shared conclusion. Michael was not protected. He was 50. He was sleep-deprived. He was under unimaginable pressure to deliver the biggest comeback of his career. And he was surrounded by people who needed him to perform more than they needed him to rest. The question was never whether he had enough talent. The question was whether anyone ever truly told him to stop. In the end, the tragedy of Michael Jackson's final hours is stark in its simplicity. His death was not sudden. It was the last step in a long descent that almost no one dared to interrupt. And that is why the question will not die, even as the years pass. Was this fate, or was it preventable? Tell me what you believe really happened. And remember, the answers the industry is most